Friends, welcome back to our Holy Roast podcast for our next episode here in season 2. We are so glad you're joining us today to talk about the issue of immigration and ways that our church can be involved and just be made aware of many things that many of our neighbors are facing right now. We are so excited for our 2 guests who are with us today. We have Mizari Suárez, the Executive Director of Neighbors Immigration Clinic, and also Reverend John Gallaher, who's the pastor at Embrace UMC in Lexington. So welcome, friends. Thank you so much for being here for this very important topic. So just to start out, just to kind of share a little bit more about the story of Neighbors Immigration Clinic. John, I know you've been there since the beginning of that. So can you share maybe a little bit more about the story behind it and what inspired its founding?
Yeah, no, I'd be happy to. And I just want to thank you all for inviting us to be here.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
I feel like these issues are really, really important. And I feel like we are in a moment when there's a lot of forces around us trying to kind of lull us to sleep and tell us that things are not that bad, or trying to, I don't know, the Cornel West talked about these weapons of mass distraction, that always working to keep us kind of distracted and not focusing on what matters. So I just thank you all for being willing to have these conversations.
Yeah.
And particularly your last episode was a really good conversation around issues of race and some of that we often don't talk about. But one thing that I've been clinging to lately, there's a biblical scholar that I love named Ched Myers. Have you ever heard of him?
Haven't.
He wrote a commentary called Binding the Strong Man. Everybody should listen. But
We'll put it in the show notes.
It's a commentary on the Gospel of Mark, and it just a really radical text. But he's an activist and biblical scholar. But he talks about how we need to practice insomniac discipleship, and the idea that we need to stay awake to both the hope and the horror. And I think we often veer to one side. It's like, I'm kind of a negative person, and I tend to be a little bit more pessimistic, and I can see the horror very clearly and all the hard things. And my church has to remind me, John, it's okay to celebrate sometimes. We need to have joy. There's beauty still around us.
Go buy the sheet cake, right?
Yeah. But often the tendency, particularly I think here in our nation, is to focus just on the hope, particularly in the church, and kind of put on rose-colored glasses, where we only see the positive things, and we fail to keep our eyes open to the hard stuff as well. And so I'm just grateful that you all have this platform where we can talk about both, the hope, because there still is hope, and also the really hard stuff that we're facing. So.
Reminds me of some scripture like "Wake up, oh you sleepers." It kind of resonates a bit of staying awake and alert. Thank you for that.
Yeah, there's an old song. I think it's like a old soul R&B song. It says, "Wake up, everybody! No more sleeping in bed." And I just think it's important for us to keep our eyes open and pay attention. So I think these are all really important things to deal with. So thanks for having us here.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I can tell you a little bit about how Neighbors formed. I'll try to keep this really brief as I can.
We only have 3 hours for this podcast. That's it.
I do appreciate a good long-form podcast.
Yeah.
But I'm the pastor at Embrace Church, which is the United Methodist Church in Lexington, Kentucky. And we are in a community that has a very large immigrant population. I started at my church over 18 years ago as the youth pastor in 2006. It was called the Rock La Roca at the time. And we were an intentionally kind of multicultural church at that time. And I was tasked with leading a youth group, but there were not many kids. There was a handful of kids, and they said, and there were no youth at the church really. So they said, you need to start a youth group with kids from the community. And I was like, oh, this sounds great, And I didn't know what I was doing, but we just started reaching out, and our youth group really became a youth group with kids from all over the place. And we had so many immigrant youth and their families who were involved there at that youth group. And through those relationships that I formed, 5 years as the youth pastor, then through a season of leading a ministry called Common Good at our church with my wife, just met so many immigrant families from all over our neighborhood. I mean, we're talking dozens of families, and many of them became like second family to me. And those relationships changed me in a deep and profound way. And it became abundantly clear to me really quickly that our communities are so much stronger the more that we welcome immigrants into our communities and fully include them into life of what we're up to. And really those relationships have made me a better person and helped me to grow and change and bless me tremendously. And so that kind of is where my heart for these issues was formed, was through those relationships and connections with people. The story of Neighbors begins when I was the pastor at Embrace. This was a few years ago, I think around 2018, 2019. Julie Hager-Love, who I'm sure many of the listeners know, who's at the United Methodist Children's Home now, but at the time was working at the conference office. She reached out to me to have lunch and wanted to tell me about this wonderful ministry of the United Methodist Church. At the time, it was called Justice for Our Neighbors. Now it's called the Immigration Law and Justice Network. It's changed names. But it's a ministry that is part of the United Methodist Church that most people in Kentucky do not know anything about, but they really help start legal clinics and also empower and support and resource immigration legal clinics all across the country. And I think they have around 20 right now, and Mizari can share more about that. But she was telling me about this wonderful ministry, and she said, I've always wanted something like this in Kentucky, one of these sites, but I've never been able to find anybody who can run with it and make it happen. And she's like, do you want to do this? And I was like, I don't think I can. I've started one nonprofit and that took a whole lot out of me, one of the hardest things I've ever done. And I was like, I don't think I have the time and energy to do this again. And I don't know if I'm the right person. But over time, we did some kind of informational sessions, tried to rally some interest among the conference, and it was really Lexington people that really showed a lot of interest, and it was one of those things that if it wasn't meant to be, I figured it would just kind of die out, but it kept coming back up, and I couldn't let it go, and other people were saying they were excited about it. We ended up meeting with kind of some key stakeholders in Lexington who were doing this type of work, and they were like, yes, we're doing this, but we need more people to do this work. It is too much. It's too overwhelming. And so through kind of coincidence in some ways, but maybe not, it could have been the Spirit working. Someone in my church, her name was Sarah Adkins. We were having a conversation one day, and she was an attorney, and she had some experience in immigration law. She knew about this, and she's like, I'm transitioning into moving in a different direction because the job she was in was ending, and she's like, I think I'd like to help make this happen. And when she said that, I was like, I think we got to do this, And so we started reaching out to different folks in Lexington who care about these issues and started to form a board of directors. And from there, it was a wonderful, diverse group of people who jumped in, and it really became about this community of people who wanted to kind of own this ministry and this work and see it come to fruition. We started right before the pandemic. We had kind of our big launch, and it was so exciting. And then the COVID whole thing, quarantine and all that happened. And so it was really hard to kind of get get momentum. And so we've gone through some shifts and changes since then. And I was on the board for a few years, and I'm no longer on the board, but still a champion and kind of cheerleader for the work, and want to try to support Mizari and what they're doing in any way I can. But I'm really excited about this new direction that we're in with Mizari being the executive director, and she can tell you more about the legal director they have on staff. But they've got a wonderful board, and they're right there in a community that has the most, probably the largest immigrant community in Lexington, and just really hitting the ground running. So I'm super excited.
That's wonderful.
So I'd like Mizari to share more about what we're doing now.
Yeah, share about maybe some of the legal things that you all address and how you help.
So I think it's also important to share that when Neighbors got started, there's these satellite clinics in Somerset in Northern Kentucky. Mm-hmm. And that really, that has laid our work for statewide. So Neighbors, although we are located in Lexington, we are in 19 counties. Wow. And some of these counties, like Whitesburg, Kentucky, I had no idea where Whitesburg, or Wayne County, which could be a 3-hour drive, so 3-hour there and 3-hour back. And so we are dedicating time and resources into rural communities. And really, I think that was also part of the mission of Neighbors, is making sure that, yes, a lot of the times, a lot of our resources, especially with the topic of immigration, is very concentrated in big cities, right? Like Louisville and Lexington or in Bowling Green. But we also need to realize that a lot of our immigrant neighbors are living in rural areas. And are also helping create, right? They're helping revitalizing certain areas. I look at Appalachia. Whitesburg is a perfect example. I was in Whitesburg not too long ago, and it was a Monday, and everything was closed except this Mexican restaurant. And I'm like, okay, where are people getting their food? So when we're thinking about like how immigrants are part of our communities, they are the places that are feeding us. There are the places that are giving us a place to meet with people, or whatever it may be. They are revitalizing things that we've either said historically, Appalachia is no longer the place we want to invest, and we're taking, and we know the history of Appalachia. And so we know that there are so many immigrants that are investing in rural areas, and we need to share those resources that we have. And so we have a legal director. Her name is Katie Taylor. She's phenomenal, to be honest with you. I don't know if she sleeps. I hope she sleeps because I just can't believe the work that she's doing. And I should mention that we are a mighty team of 2 women, 2 powerful women.
Yes.
And we are in 19 counties. So people ask us, how are you doing this work? We're doing it with a lot of love and passion for our immigrant community. We obviously, like every nonprofit, we face budget cuts, we face funding issues. But we are really doing this work. It doesn't cost a lot. The biggest cost is salary, right? And also when we're thinking about Kentucky, as we are part of an affiliate network, like John mentioned, Immigration Law and Justice Network, there's 20 sites, and some of the sites are really small sites like Neighbors with 2 staff. And then we have a site like Omaha, Nebraska, which is what we hope to be. And Omaha has about 40 attorneys.
Wow.
But they also have Buffett money. So Buffett, if you're listening, Kentucky would love your money.
That's right. We'll tag.
Yes, please tag him. And so it's like we want to be able to share with our national network of like the work that we're also doing in Kentucky. And also the fact that like we're in the southern part of this country, right? And a lot of things are also targeting our immigrant communities. A lot of people think, well, immigration is not a big issue because we're so far away from the border. But the reality is that it is a big issue, and our neighbors face those issues. And so our work is deeply grounded in that we want to make sure that everyone has access to our legal services by providing low-cost legal services. So what does that mean? That means that what someone would pay with a private attorney is not what you would pay with us. And a lot of the times, for example, our biggest caseload is asylum, special immigrant juvenile status, and removal orders. And for special immigrant juvenile status, those are young people who come to this country by themselves. And a lot of times they're reuniting with a mom or with dad. And sometimes mom has 3 other children. And we're talking about each predicate order, which is the first initial step that we need in family court in order to put in an immigration application, that's costing roughly $600. That's in our office. A private attorney is charging anywhere between $1,000 to $1,500. So imagine if you have to pay $150 for 3 children. That's a lot of money. And so our work is, how can we make this accessible to folks? A lot of the times we have single moms, dads who can't pay that, and that is okay. Our job is not to become millionaires out of this. Our job is to help people. And so that's where we kind of have to get creative of how can we get supporters to join us in figuring out how do we help our neighbors. And one of the things is like, if you donate $10, I can tell you what $10 goes to. It goes to our paper. If you donate $50, it goes to interpreters and it goes to consultations. And so I think it's really good for us. A lot of the work that we do is people think about legal services and they're like, well, how can I help? I want to be of service and I want to do something that is actionable. And it's like, well, that is actionable. You're making sure that families, that single moms don't have to worry about, what do I do? Do I pay this immigration thing that I know will change the life of my child, or do I feed my family and pay rent? Those are the decisions that our neighbors are making. And it doesn't get any better when we talk about the legal landscape. So like John mentioned in Lexington, there's a group of people who are like, yes, we need more people to do this. And we need more people to do this statewide. A lot of our immigrant neighbors in Wayne County don't have don't have a KRM. They have to travel. We travel to them because we want to make sure that we can eliminate as many barriers as we can. Yes, it becomes a barrier on our end, but we want to be able to be there for them. And so we need to understand that there's also a shortage of immigration legal services in Kentucky. Yeah. We're not like California or Omaha, where there's so many organizations, so many law firms that are saying, I want to offer my services pro bono. We're very limited. And there's also very few private immigration attorneys that are great, that are willing to actually help the community and work with them. And so we're facing that shortage, and we're seeing it now, right, with like the federal freeze that is impacting organizations like KRM or other sister orgs, and we're seeing that. And so our goal is, how do we continue to build capacity as we're going statewide, and how do we do that in a sustainable way that makes sure that we still care for our immigrant neighbors?
Yeah. Wow. So what I hear is, for people who are listening who might have these, that might be lawyers or might be in immigration law, like, you're recruiting people that you could refer people to. Is that like actionable or not?
That is very much actionable. Okay. And even, I would even say, if you're a family attorney in some, like, we're in 19 counties, so we're keeping track of, you know, how easy or hard it is to work with certain judges at certain family courts. And so we kind of have a pathway. We kind of have like this book of like, hey, it's easy to work with this attorney, with this judge at this county. And what our ideal vision is that we would train family attorneys to go and do predicate orders for us. Because what happens is that Katie is in court 4 times out of the week. That means that, and sometimes, like, for example, in Fayette County, she has to sit there. If court is at 1, she'll more than likely sit there from 1 to 4. And she'll probably more than likely will be the last case, or who knows when in between. So that's a lot of time that we're spending in court that someone can volunteer, a family attorney can volunteer. And I think the issue we run to, especially with family attorneys, is that it's such... especially special immigrant juvenile status, it's such there's this intersection between family law and who gets custody, who gets guardianship, and then immigration. And we're not asking you to do the immigration part. We will do the immigration part, but could you help us do that initial finding of a predicate order? And so, I think that's the call. The call is to, even if you're part of a law firm, like, could you provide pro bono services? And if you can't do that, we've had law firms reach out and be like, could we just send you a check? I will take a check too.
Yes,
Thank you.
Always.
Always. But it's like, we also want people to learn and also understand the work that we're doing, because it's not what we see in the movies or what we read in books. It's very complicated.
Yeah. Thank you for speaking more, because I'm sure for people who are listening, for pastors who are out there, like, we have lawyers in our churches, or there are other leaders who are listening that may have not, maybe considered other ways that they can be involved in this work as you're trying to expand, and maybe not even aware that in your county there are immigrants, like, I agree with you that you typically think of Louisville, Lexington, Bowling Green, but it's they are enriching our communities much beyond those 3 counties. Can you share maybe a success story of how you've seen some of these services impact your clients?
Yeah, I think the most recent one happened right before Christmas break, and it was in Fayette County. We were trying to get a predicate order approved by a judge there, and this judge is just... They're really hard to work with, complicated, difficult, all around. Everything you can think of, that's that judge. And we really did not think that this was going to happen. And the story behind this particular client was that they were facing sexual abuse in their home country, and both the parents knew. They had a sister here in Lexington, and the sister brought them over. So they made the journey from Honduras all the way here. And our finding was, like, if parents knew that this young child was being sexually abused, by family members in the own home and other people, and they could not keep this child safe. Our finding is like they're better off staying with sister here in Lexington. And that judge was not finding it, was not finding the credible things that our lawyer was fighting for. And so we kind of had a runaround of like, hey, we were going back to multiple court hearings. And just before break, our network did a spotlight on the work that we were doing, especially around special immigrant juvenile, because judges are so afraid to talk about that subject because they think that they are doing something to grant people immigration status. And if you're a judge listening, you don't have that kind of power. I wish you did. You would make our lives a lot easier. But you're a family court judge. Your job is just to find where's that child safe? Who needs to have guardianship of that child? Your job is to not make an immigration finding. That's something that the federal government does. And that's the second process. So we need your help to get from point A to point B. And that judge was just not understanding it. And also, like, as we were thinking about how we advocate for our immigrant neighbors, think about who you're voting for judges in Lexington and Louisville, whoever it is, because a lot of the times these judges are in their benches for 6 to 7 years, right? And a lot of the times we think they're good based on one topic, but we also need to think about, what about our immigrant neighbors? What about those who get caught up in the court system? We need to think about that, and we need to challenge that. And so when that was highlighted, we were like, there's no way that they're going to grant this predicate order. Sure enough, like a couple days before going into break, December 20th, we got the predicate order signed by the judge. And that to us was a success because that young person gets to stay in a place that is safe for them. And they've already decided that Kentucky is their home.
Yeah.
And I think that's powerful. If we can find places, sorry, I'm about to cry.
No,
if we can find places that make us feel safe.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that is powerful.
Yeah. Yeah. Building a home. Yeah.
That's, I'm just taking a moment to take that in. That's good. Thank you for sharing that story. I'm going to make a joke, buy the sheet cake for celebration. I mean, because oftentimes we don't hear these success stories, right? And I think the impact that you are making is just incredible. It is incredible. I can feel your passion, Mizari. And this is the first time we have met. And so this has been so good for me. Where does this passion come from for you,
Oh,
Mizari?
gosh. That's going to make me more cry.
I'm sorry.
I want to know too, Mizari. Where does it come from?
So I will say that, so I came to this country undocumented at the age of 3. And we landed in Omaha, Nebraska, funny enough, because my grandma met my grandpa, and she's just like, Nebraska. And you might be thinking, why Nebraska? Well, the meatpacking industry. Sure. Our family was working in the meatpacking industry, and my mom went through domestic violence in Nebraska. And in order to just kind of get away from it, my uncle had moved from Nebraska to Kentucky for the horse farm industry. And my mom was like, you know what, we need to get away because this is no longer a safe space for us. My mom was a victim of domestic violence. I saw a lot of domestic violence in our home. And so we moved to Kentucky. We've been in Kentucky for 20 years now, 21, 22 years. So most of our life has been here in Kentucky. But I am a product of legal services. I am a product of the work that Neighbors is doing. We were able to get status through the legal aid of the Bluegrass. Kimberly Iden, I still remember till this day, she's a magnificent attorney in Lexington. And I saw my mom go through the system of immigration. It's a very complex system. And I always knew I was undocumented. And how I got involved in this work was I was going into college, and I really wanted to go to U of L because I was like, I really want to be on U of L's campus. It's very diverse. I wanted to be around people that looked like me, that I could build a relationship with. And I remember my mom driving me from Lexington to Louisville for orientation, and I was handed a bill of $5,000. And I was like, what? I thought FAFSA would cover this. Yeah. And I realized that because of my status, FAFSA would not be able to cover my tuition, provide any sort of tuition. So I got involved with Kentucky Dream Coalition at the time, which was a group of youth who were advocating for immigration reform. At that time, we were advocating for like DACA, the DREAM Act, and things like that. And I started working at a factory with my mom just to save enough money to go to college. And I was thinking my first job, I'm like, I'm going to make a lot of money and I'm going to just pay for college and be okay. Well, I made $500.
Yeah.
It was unrealistic.
Yeah.
And those $500 didn't even cover one course at BCTC. So I ended up enrolling at BCTC, got more involved with the Kentucky Dream Coalition group, and we were doing civil disobedience all over the country. And I've made some not so great decisions while I was in college of like, do I go to class or do I go to Texas and protest X, Y, and Z, the expansion of detention centers? And that was the work that I was involved in for the longest time. So my background is not necessarily fundraising, but it's more organizing in the community.
Yeah.
And that's where my passion comes from. My mom she will become a citizen soon.
Yeah.
Hopefully. We've been in this country for 27 years now.
Yeah.
So after 27 years, and I want people to like hear the 27 because it's not something that, hey, you just kind of get in line. There's a lot of ideas, especially right now in the media of like, if you would just follow the law.
Yeah.
Well, there is no law. Immigration is like number 2 in the most complicated sectors of law, and there are no laws. And what we're following are executive orders that sometimes don't make no sense.
And they change.
And they change.
Yeah.
You need
And they're
an attorney just
paused.
to go through that.
And they get enjoined. And so it's like we have to every day look at the law. Katie spends an hour every day just reviewing what happened last week or reviewing what happened yesterday. So when we talk about immigration and why we need to fund organizations like Neighbors or any organization, we need to make sure that we're doing it for the long haul because it's not something that happens. Like my story is a perfect example. It took 27 years just for my mom, and she had to endure so much violence in order to be seen that she was acceptable enough to enter into the society as someone privileged to get a green card or get a status or become a citizen. She had to go through violence. And I think that speaks a lot about our country, and our society and the place that we live in, and how we view people who are poor, people who look different from us, that they must endure something in order to be worthy of compassion, of love, of kindness, or to be worthy of this idea of citizenship.
Yeah. That is,
Wow.
Thank you so much for sharing your story with us, Mizari, and your mother's story, because I think some of the misconceptions we get is we don't hear these stories, so we have all these assumptions behind that we may receive from media,
Absolutely.
or
Exactly.
Yeah.
family members, or wherever else we may be getting information from that is just not accurate.
Yeah.
Not accurate. And I think you're providing that landscape for us. This is what it actually looks like. That's why it's so important to back off some of our prepared questions to go to that one, because we need to hear that. And we need to be informed by that. And that needs to be affecting who we are, how we vote, how we advocate,
how we see our neighbors.
That's right.
Right? I mean, we really can't love our neighbors unless we fully know them and see them and honor their humanity and hear stories like beyond the media, right? Beyond the news, beyond, that's just so powerful of like years. I mean, I see this work of partnership and advocacy with your clinic. It's like walking alongside of people for years. Right. And that gives a whole new lens of what a solidarity with our neighbors really means.
Yeah.
You know, a common refrain I hear from people when I talk about these issues, particularly, white Americans, is they will say, well, I'm all for immigration. Just need to do it the right way.
Yeah.
Yes.
And they don't even know what that means.
No,
right?
they don't know, often don't know what that means. They have no idea. And often for the vast majority of people in our world, there is no right way. Like there's not a path towards applying and getting to come here unless you have resources or you come from particular places. And it also has helped me to think, if I was in a situation where I had to flee my home because of violence or just it being unsafe or the harsh reality of poverty, I would make the same choice to leave and do all I can to protect my family. I remember a friend of mine shared a poem with me. I think it's Warsaw-shire. Do you know this poem? And it's like, no one leaves home unless home is the mouth of a shark. It's kind of the idea. And it's, I think she's trying to get to this idea that folks who are fleeing the place that they call home, they're doing it because they're trying to survive, you know, and we would do the same exact thing. All of us here, we would do what we had to do to protect our children and our families. And if that, whatever that means, I'm going to do it, you know? And so I think that empathy and that compassion and even today, there are Christians arguing that empathy is a sin. I don't know if you've heard this. There's Mercy. Books being written about this. Compassion is under assault, you know, right now from a lot of the loudest voices. And man, I feel like we're losing our humanity, you know. I don't think we are created to be at odds with each other or divided from one another. We are all, in a sense, come from the same place, you know. And so just being able to help our people in our churches and all this, tap back into that, what it means to be
human,
created in God's image, you know, every single one of us.
Yes.
I think narrative and story plays such a key role for us in hearing experiences and allowing ourselves to experience things like compassion, empathy, and mercy goes a long way. And we as a church, right, perhaps have a role to play in this, right? And this kind of stories that we tell and we share and how our faith informs what we believe and how we move forward. And so, John, I wonder if I can pivot to you real quick and say, hey, for you and your story, and perhaps even Embrace's story in general, what role has that faith story brought about in these conversations that you are having at a local level? And perhaps what can our listeners hear and to understand and be inspired by to move forward in their own local context?
Yeah, I mean, I think as my role as a pastor, I have a very unique opportunity to, I mean, every week I get to decide in some ways like what we're engaging with in our Sunday. I mean, we have 100 to 200 people that are there captive, you know, engaging. And so what are the stories we're telling? What are the scriptures we're preaching from? Who are the people that we're having come up on the stage and share about their experiences? And over time, I've just felt this conviction that I need to get out of the way a lot more and also let others have the stage. I remember there was a time, and it was really a formative moment for me in 2016. Philando Castile and Alton Sterling, two Black men, were killed by police, and I remember a lot of Black people in my circle were talking to me about these things, and some young people were talking to me, and just really feeling challenged that we need to talk about this in church, and I'd not talked really much about that, very specifically, and what ended up happening is some folks in our church who were very much directly impacted. We had a Black man get up and talk about his experience with his own son and how he's scared to raise this child in this nation. And it was a really formative experience for our church to hear their stories. And so when they heard something like Black Lives Matter, it didn't feel as like triggering to them because they were hearing someone they love was talking about this, you know, and it made a big impact in their lives. And I've just seen over and over as we allow people to tell their stories and let them know that their stories have power and meaning, and it's been a really important shift. And I think for me as a pastor, like just trying to do good theology and biblical study and see that we have a whole biblical story and faith tradition that it's so pro-immigrant, you know, right. And it's unbelievable. I mean, you can start at Genesis with Abraham. I mean, Abraham's call and the blessing upon Abraham and his people was to be a blessing to the whole world. It was not about them. It was not to conquer and have power over the whole world. It was to bless the whole world. You see the story of Exodus. The Israelites were living as enslaved immigrants in Egypt, and God set them free. God sided with the immigrant and the oppressed and set them free. You see in the Old Testament law that was given to Moses, there's provisions all throughout the law to make room and space to care for the immigrants among them. The prophetic tradition is the things God got so mad about often was that you're neglecting the widows and the foreigners and the poor.
That's right.
Jesus came in the prophetic tradition in a powerful way. Jesus' own birth story. I mean, you think about Jesus' own family had to flee his homeland as refugees. They took refuge. It's the literal words where refugee comes from, to flee to Egypt, to seek safety by flight.
Yeah.
And we think that we need to shut down refugee access to our country. I mean, it's just mind-boggling to me. And then obviously the story of Jesus is always, it's like everybody's pushed to the margins, taking those from the margins and putting them at the center of his life and ministry and work. We see it in Acts, the Holy Spirit. Willie James Jennings talks about widening circles of inclusion that we find in Acts. It's the Spirit constantly pushing people to the people they did not want to go to.
Right.
And to go to places they did not want to go and reach out to people they did not want to reach out to. And I think we need to discern where the Spirit is leading us now and how the Spirit is leading us in this moment to widen our embrace. And how do we go and reach out to those folks who are not, who are being demonized and vilified and just such unfair and really just frankly cruel ways right now. And so the Spirit's leading us to more love and the Spirit's already doing that work. It's just whether we're willing to get on board.
Will we catch up with
it? And the Spirit is working through neighbors right now and working through people of all different faiths all across the world, like leading to more freedom and liberation to all. And I think that we have a choice. Are we going to stand in solidarity with those folks and join the Spirit and what the Spirit's up to? So I could talk about this a long time.
Come on, preach. Let's go. I love it.
Paul's letters. It's even in Paul's letters, it's all over that. Paul's making space for the vulnerable and the weakest among them. He's like, when y'all share a meal or get together, think about the weakest people and don't make it too hard for them, And we lose track of that so much, particularly those of us in the dominant culture. We have dominant cultural blinders where we literally can't see the experience of others because we don't have to.
Right.
We can exist in this life, and I don't have to consider so many people's experience because of who I am as a white man living in this country. And I've been challenged to realize I need to step back and see a wider picture.
Well, and that speaks to kind of the word that you brought in the very beginning of like, staying awake and alert to the cruelty and the suffering that's going on around us. Like if it might not impact me or my family directly. And so I think we're already in the middle of it, but there are going to be so many opportunities and moments where we have a choice that we can make, where we focus on our own selves and our own safety and sense of security and just put those blinders up. Or that widening, right, of the looking out of and kind of to reference our last conversation with Dr. Prelo, we have to be intentional, those in the dominant culture, to go to spaces and places where we are not dominant so that we can be aware and we can hear story and we can learn from, we can humble ourselves to be the learner in that situation and see, I mean, when you start putting names and faces to things like this that you might not be surrounded by, I mean, that's when the Spirit's at work in your own heart, right? And tearing down some of these, biases that we might carry, right? And tearing down some of these walls that divide us that are so pervasive in the church still today.
Yeah, and I think we have a wonderful opportunity is I know a lot of the audience who's listening to this are likely pastors and lay leaders in churches, and we have an opportunity to with a lot of grace and a lot of care to talk to our churches about these things, you know, because I think a lot of what we're facing right now is a failure of discipleship. We've not helped people see what it means to follow the way of Christ. We've believed the right doctrines and talked about personal salvation, but we are called to follow in this way, in this path that Christ, that Jesus has shown us. And so I think there are ways to talk about this and gently and kindly, but also truthfully with our people to help bring them along. And I think the places, Mizari, these counties in Appalachia she's talking about, there's likely United Methodist Church close by.
Yes.
And so if you're listening to this and you have a church, y'all have immigrants in your communities, and whether you know it or not, you know.
Exactly.
And maybe you're just not going to those parts of the communities, but Neighbors is trying to reach out, you know, and the message I heard from Mizari too is that like resources are so needed, like financial contributions are needed right now. And that's hard because we also want to get ourselves involved in this, as in our bodies involved, but but often the money is this thing we hold most tightly to, and being willing to share that. And the story of Scripture is also about redistribution. It's about those who have a lot sharing and giving and being able to funnel those resources to people who need them. And so hopefully we can recover some of that sense of the early church and that radical kind of commitment they had to care for one another, and realize that neighbors, in particular, as a United Methodist thing,
it's a part of us.
Needs our support. And we got to take the risk and give, even if we don't feel like we have it. We got to take the risk and do it. And I know there's lots of other good ministries happening too that we need to support. So there are challenges there to figure out how to prioritize where we're giving. But this is a critical moment, I think, as you all know, for immigrants right now.
Yeah. Go back to you, Mizari. It is a critical moment, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I think for some of us, when I talk to my folks, my people here in this building and in my small groups, I often tell them to take a deep breath first, right? Take a deep breath. You'll be okay. Let's have a conversation.
We're going to talk about hard things.
And I hope, and we can talk about hard things. And I hope this podcast was birthed out of that too, with Rachel and myself and the Board of Ordained Ministry, to say we can talk about hard things and we can do it well.
Yeah.
Well, because oftentimes naturally it's a friend in town, like a pastor friend, that we would say, what are we going to do about this now? How are we going to talk about this in our church? We don't know. Let's have a cup of coffee. Yeah.
Let's get into it. And I've been so proud of the response to this podcast has been, we can have good conversations and we can be informed. And that way, that informing story helps us to know our next best step. Right. And so, Mizari, I wonder from you, what are some of the current policies that we should be aware of in this cultural moment that we find ourselves in? And is there anything we can respond to when it comes to it?
Yeah, I think, as I was thinking about that question last night, there's so many of them. But the one that really, that's most alarming to us is the expedited expansion of removal. Which basically is, we had it the first Trump administration. Biden was not doing it, but now we're back and there's an expansion part to it. So what does it mean? It basically means that if you've been in this country for less than 2 years and you have an encounter with ICE, you will be deported. And this administration has made it very clear. But the expansion part is that no longer will you have access to be seen by an immigration judge to make your case. So if I, Mizari, get picked up, hypothetically, let's say I get picked up today, I will not be given the opportunity to call my attorney or to be seen by a judge to make my case. And that is scary for a lot of our new arrivals. And we all have, seen the news and heard about the border opening up and closing down, opening up and closing down, and all these the CBP app and all those things that have to do with our asylum seekers. That is a huge part of our current population at the moment, is those new arrivals. And the other part of it is that they have to show proof that they've been in this country for longer than 2 years. So not only are we worried about new arrivals, we're also worried about those who've been here, for example, like my family that's been here for 27 years, right? That a lot of members in my family don't have a status. So we live in a mixed status household, and they have to figure out a way to prove that they've been here for 27 years. So when we as a country have done certain things to restrict people of either moving or moving around spaces, like, for example, driver's license, right? Undocumented immigrants don't have access to driver's license. So there's no way of someone of 27 years to prove that they've been here. And one of the things that we've been asking a lot of people, and this is where if you're called to service, you're called to do something, talk to your immigrant neighbors, get to know your immigrant neighbors, and figure out what is it that they can do to show that they've been in this country. So what we've been telling folks is, if you have kids in school, in public schools, you can ask for an enrollment history that shows that your children have been in the public school system for 5 or finished, went from elementary to high school in the public system, and it has to have your name on it. So if you're the guardian, it has to have your name and address. If you shop online, which we know that there's not a lot because some of our immigrant neighbors are not allowed to have debit cards, but there are some banks that allow our immigrant undocumented neighbors to have access to bank cards. So ask your bank for a bank enrollment history so that you can carry with you. If you are and I think it's also really clear to mention that regardless of status, if you look a certain way, if you have an accent, if they can hear a single thing of an accent, if you mix up words, I mix up my words all the time because my brain thinks in Spanish and I try to say it in English. Right. You are a target regardless if you have a status. And we saw that. We saw that 2 Puerto Ricans, and FYI, Puerto Rico is part of the U.S. We're deported, we're detained, right? And so I think it's very important to say that this is not just a target on immigrants and asking people. You can't tell if I have a status. You can't sit here and tell me, well, Mizari, I think you're undocumented based on. No, it's this idea that we create about who needs to be undocumented based on what, right? Which is a concept of race. Yeah. Yes. And so if you look like, have an accent, look brown, look black, whatever it may be, you are a target. And so we're asking folks, undocumented or have status, to carry some proof that you have that with you. And a lot of people, when we've shared this, especially with some folks that have called our office churches, mainly are like, wow, I can't believe this. And I'm like, well, I can. Why can't you believe it? We've asked people to identify themselves before. Arizona has a history of stop and identify, right? Show me your papers law. Yes. Wow. And so it's now just become more of a national thing, and we're asking people to do it. So one of the things that we're encouraging folks, that if you're called to service, talk to your immigrant neighbors, get to know your immigrant neighbors, tell them, hey, I learned about expedited removal. Can we talk about what are you doing to keep yourself safe? Can I help you go to the school system? A lot of the times our school systems are not, they're not inclusive of our multilingual families, right? They're not inclusive of people who don't necessarily, English is not their dominant language. So a lot of the times it's really hard for them and don't have the confidence to go by themselves. So maybe walking alongside them and saying, hey, can I go down to Arlington Elementary and help you take that enrollment, get that enrollment paper? And making sure that they have a copy of it, that they have multiple copies, and that their children know where to. And that's a scary thing, right? If we have to train our children of like, hey, if something were to happen to mom or dad, this is the information you need. But those are conversations that as neighbors we can have with people, and we can have them if only we get to know them. And it's a tight balance, because you don't want to be seen as the savior. That's what conversations with church leaders. But at this point, people need you to walk and be willing to be uncomfortable with what you may or may not know, and be willing to mess up, be willing to do all those things. So for us, like at that moment, that's kind of been what we're pushing for. Another thing that we've really, and for immigrants and non-immigrants, is to just educate yourself on the difference between ICE presence and ICE raids. So one of the things that happened right after inauguration was that everyone was saying, oh, there's an ICE raid in Lexington, there's an ICE raid in Lexington. And it just happened to be ICE presence. And it's very important to know that we always have ICE presence. We had ICE presence in the Biden administration. We had ICE presence in the Trump administration. And neither the Trump administration or the Biden administration, the first Trump administration, they have not surpassed the deportation numbers that Obama. Obama was deporter in chief. He has deported more people than any other president in this country. And it's important to say that, because it's not a Democrat issue and it's not a Republican issue. We just don't know how to tackle this, and we don't know how to work around it. And so it's very important to know that there's always ICE presence, and to understand what an ICE presence versus an ICE raid, because what we're seeing is that people are fearful. People are scared. People are not going to the grocery stores. People are not taking their children to school. I have a friend who's a teacher, and she was telling me, she's like, yeah, half of my kids didn't come to school like the week after inauguration. And that is the reality. That is the reality. And I think that there needs to be a lot of education right now about how immigration works, the complex system that this is, and the fact that there's laws, but they're very complicated. And sometimes those laws don't even make sense. So it's very important as a church, as, people to learn and to understand that we need to understand this complexity. And what Neighbors is doing is that we're trying to outsmart this complexity, not by trying to change not by, saying, hey, you need to vote Democrat or you need to vote Republican. I'm not trying to change policy, nor are we working with policy. We're just trying to work with what we are given through executive orders, through the law, and try to help people find a way to stay here.
Yeah.
So where would you recommend our church leaders go to be educated? Because that is a threshold for us that we do need to go and push forward, right?
Yeah.
I remember some of this was coming out, and John and I were in conversations, and other folks like, what do we do now? And we need some help. We need some education because we're not sure.
Guidance.
I have a preschool that is beautifully diverse here at the church. We have a Spanish-speaking congregation as a part of who we are. And I felt very ill-informed, right? I had some assumptions of what I could do, but I was scrambling to find information, education that could be, so I can lead in this present moment. So where would you recommend we find resources like that?
I would say Immigration Law and Justice Network. They are an affiliate network, but they're doing a lot of the work on a national level, the policies that are coming down, analyzing those executive orders. And what we're doing as, being here in the state, being an affiliate, is that we're trying to also do the educational piece.
Okay. Yeah.
So I will put, shameless plug, Neighbors as well, of like, that's the work that we're trying to do. When the conversation was about sensitive locations, about ICE having, okay with ICE going into schools, into churches, we had a lot of people call us, a lot of church members call us. And there was one particular, I won't mention the church, but one particular person who said, well, what do I do if they come to my congregation? Do I let them in? And I was like, no, you wouldn't let them in. And they're like, well, what if the members of my congregation get upset because we're not following the law? And I was like, well, I can't help you there. I can only tell you that, like, this is a private space, right? This is a private space. If we put out there, hey, only staff and family members of staff, ICE can't come through here, right? And so it's like really challenging our minds to not be disobedient, but to just do it and just not be afraid of the what ifs. The what ifs this church member who gives me $1 million each year gets upset because I'm not following the law. Well, it's like, it's your right. You have a right, right? We all have rights. And the rights that we're sharing with immigrants are not different from your rights or different from my rights. It's the same rights of like, you have the right to remain silent. You have the right to not open your door to anyone. And just as a church, you have the right to not let anyone into your doors, right? And figuring out what are public space, what are public areas, what are private spaces. And that is something that you as a church, alongside consulting with us or whoever it may be, that we can figure out of how do we keep our neighbors safe. But I also know that the Jesus I know and the Jesus I love would not allow anyone to walk through those doors.
Sure. Yeah.
And through this process of like getting to know so many people and getting to know the faith community and how the faith community can help neighbors, I've come to a conclusion, and no offense here, but we all love a different Jesus. And we all have a different idea of who Jesus loves. And we get to pick and choose who Jesus wants to love based on what we know. And that's really hard for me sometimes, especially as a curious soul of like, I'm like currently in the moment of, I wouldn't say shopping around, but visiting different congregations of like, where do I fit? And you can see that in whoever preaches. You can see of who we're taught to love. And that is difficult. That is difficult for people that look different than the congregations I'm visiting, which are predominantly white. And that's difficult for someone who is an immigrant woman, who is brown, who obviously does not fit here. So our thing at Neighbors has been, we're loving people, and the Jesus I know and the Jesus that we know would flip the tables and be like, you're not allowed to come in, right? And I ask people, and I ask that church, what would Jesus do? And they were just like, okay, I see where you're going with this.
It's a great
like,
question.
The Jesus guy.
Yeah,
That
like
guy.
not, like
Which pay attention to that probably.
like what would happen? And I think it's like we just have to be okay with going against the norm, going against what we're told, and that's hard for people.
Yeah.
It's hard for institutions, which are made out of people.
Yes.
Our faith tradition has a long history of people who've gone against the grain. You know?
Yeah.
And been willing to do it.
And not
even
at the same time.
and we
Right?
have the other part too. Yes.
Yeah.
No, that is very true.
Yeah.
Thank you for naming a lot of this for us and allowing us to enter into a conversation around it, because I do think we need to wrestle with that. You know, those old age bracelets, right? Maybe we should. I handed them out to my congregation because I thought it was pretty hokey. But
No,
I
you
did.
didn't.
Oh, I did because I'm a hokey pastor.
They still make them?
They do.
Good.
You can buy.
Good.
You can buy them. The WWJD bracelet. So I handed them out to my congregation because we're really just struggling with, well, what would Jesus do? And so it's a little bit different. 2025, Louisville, Kentucky. He died 2,000 years ago, but you know what I think that becomes important for us to discern that moment, right? And how would Jesus react? And we can't know exactly, but we can know from his teachings, the way he lived, I mean, of what that could look like. In Mizari, I can say undoubtedly Jesus is on the side of the immigrant every time, right? I mean, there is just no question when you take the words and the actions of Jesus seriously of what that looks like. So thank you for your important work that you're doing, and just know that you have a conference who is praying for you now. And hopefully our prayers go beyond our thoughts and our conversations, but go into that advocacy, that action, that support. And for a lot of us, we're searching for that. What is our next best step? And you've named some of those for us. And John, you've named some of that for us. So thank you for sharing your story, because I think that helps us contextually try to understand, hey, we may not be where you are, but we have people entrusted to us, if we're a church leader, right, to enter into these conversations and to host space that we can be vulnerable in this conversation, but not just stay there, but always discerning that next best step. So thank you all so much for this conversation. I know it's been helpful for me as I try to discern my own influence here and try to discern what can we do together. I'll be calling you Mizari now, to help. So thank you.
Well, I just want to say appreciate you both so much and for sharing with us today. We have shared with you that we have a little tradition here at Holy Roast where we end with sort of a rapid fire hot seat questions. And, we talked about before we started recording not doing this today just because we knew it would be a heavier topic, but one that is so important, and yet also talking about not forgetting what it means to be human and empathy and compassion. That's also our creative spirit and our ability to find and express joy and a good holy laugh. Part of this is joy is resistance and how we keep going, especially as communities of faith. And so in that spirit, I'm going to roast you guys now.
I'm a very slow processor.
Me too.
Not today, John.
Gotta be fast, John. I'll start with you then, John. What are you reading right now?
I'm reading I read a lot of books at the same time, and I often don't finish them. Sorry for those who finish books. I'm reading a book called Improvising Church. Can't remember the author's name, but it's like using jazz as a metaphor to think about how to do church. Mere Discipleship by Lee Camp.
Okay.
Amazing book. I'm almost done with The Myth of Normal.
Okay.
Gabor Mate.
Nice.
And those are the... Oh, yeah, and I'm also reading the Strengthening the Soul of Your Leadership by Ruth Haley Barton. So reading that with some people too. So
wonderful.
There's a few books. They're all good.
Multiple books open.
I know.
Yeah, and I'm moving on. I will finish all those books.
You will?
I will. I promise.
Well done.
You've heard it here.
You've heard it here. All right, the next question I'll do for Mizari. What's one thing on your bucket list that you haven't done yet?
Ooh, one thing on my bucket list. Oh, swimming. Let me clarify. I don't know how to swim.
Yeah.
So on my bucket list is to learn how to swim.
Okay.
All right.
Love that.
A couple of years ago, I went kayaking in the ocean, which was not very smart.
That's scary.
Not knowing how to swim.
Yeah.
And so that was a reflection point for me of like, maybe we should think about adventures, but first learn how to swim.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
yeah, it's on my bucket list.
Good,
Yeah.
good. John, the next question. What's your favorite city in the U.S. other than the one you live in?
My favorite city in the U.S. I really love New Orleans. That was a cool city to go to. I'd like to go back. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's fun.
Get some beignets, right?
Yeah, the beignets were good. I love music, and there's
Yeah.
music everywhere. On
Literally
on the
everywhere.
streets. And every place, restaurant, bar, you'd walk past it. It was cool.
Yeah. That's awesome. Mizari, what is your favorite movie to quote? Or you could just say if you have a favorite movie, but I find myself quoting a particular movie often. Do you have one?
No, I don't have one. But my favorite movie is Coach Carter with Samuel Jackson.
Yeah.
It's really good. And okay, the reason why I like it is just the dedication and the discipline, right, that he built into the young men that he's working with. And so really, I don't have a quote from there, but that is probably one of my favorite.
Yes. Ooh, I love it.
I love
it.
Coach Carter. That's awesome.
Yes.
I've never seen it.
What?
I need to see it. I got to see
It's
it.
great.
I got to see it.
Yeah, we'll close a few of those books and
All right.
watch this movie. Okay?
Less
Just
books,
kidding.
more movies.
Less
Sounds
books,
good.
more movies. All right, and the last song I'll ask both of you, and it is actually the same from last season, John. So if you're called up to bat,
I was hoping you got rid of this question.
no, I did not. What's your walk up song, or what's just your pump up song? Like you're coming up to preach and
You've
you're going to
talked
drop a
about music a
word.
lot,
Yeah, we know you love music.
Yeah, I don't get pumped up that often. My son loves Thunderstruck by AC/DC.
Okay.
That's pretty good.
That's
Probably wouldn't do Highway to Hell. That's probably for a pastor not great.
Or very fun.
But
It doesn't have to be before you preach. Just anything that you just gets you fired up.
The White Stripes, I think it's like Seven Nation
Yeah.
Army. You know that one. That one gets me going pretty good too. So.
Okay, there you go.
For not liking the question, you had a lot of answers, John.
Yeah.
Funny thing, I thought about it on the way up here. I thought you might get me. So
Just in case these dorky pastors ask. All right, Mizari, same question. What's your pump up song?
Dancing Queen.
Yeah.
I asked this question to other people, so I know Dancing Queen is, I love it.
Oh, that's perfect. Yes. Thank you. Thank you all both so much. The roast is over. See, wasn't that bad.
all right, it was good.
Take a
It was
deep
good.
breath.
But we need to smile and laugh. So there you
Yes.
go.
Well, thank you all so much for joining us on the Holy Roast podcast. We do encourage you, and our communications is transforming across the conference, that you would subscribe. You will not be receiving a weekly email anymore from us or from the conference. So we encourage you, hit the subscribe button either on audio or on video so you can be up to date on these episodes that go live. And we have been kicking off pretty incredible. Season 2 has been
Yes.
great, and
Yeah.
including this one, it's just been phenomenal. And so there are a lot more coming up that you'll want to be informed that is up. So be sure to like, subscribe, comment, leave us the ratings. That would be fantastic for us going forward. But thanks for joining us.
Yeah.